Well, now this is interesting. I didn't notice it before. John, you'll know that when it says the credibility of Jesus' miracles, I thought it was just apostrophe. I didn't know it was apostrophe S. Because I always sign my letters in blessings in Jesus' name, and I just put the apostrophe.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I've seen it.
It goes both ways. I think traditionally, just the apostrophe is more traditionally used, but I've actually Googled it because it's like, which is correct? Apostrophe S or just the apostrophe? And both are correct. I think syntactically, apostrophe S is more correct, but traditionally, everybody uses just the apostrophe. So I guess the good news is you can never go wrong because both are correct.
Hey, at English, apparently you're always right, even if you choose not to use an Oxford comma.
Yep. Well, Oxford commas, that's a whole other story. That was actually applicable to our conversation last week. Because remember, in apobetics, the Oxford comma could mean life or death.
Yeah.
Let's eat Grandpa versus let's eat Grandpa. That's an Oxford comma, I think. Or maybe an Oxford comma is referring to lists.
It's lists.
Yeah, referring to like the last comma you used before and. I think that's, yeah. So I was wrong, never mind. Commas do save lives though.
Yes. I think, and maybe you just said it because I want to. In the Greek, the original manuscripts, they don't have commas.
Hmm?
In the original manuscripts, there's no like commas. To
Oh,
separate
yeah.
things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, punctuation wasn't a development in the Hebrew language.
Yeah.
So everybody get a chance to read the essay, The Credibility of Jesus' Miracles. Nobody read it?
I
yeah.
read it. Yep.
Yep. So miracles aren't really something that we talk about a whole lot in apologetics, but nevertheless they are, important. So I think before we begin our discussion, I think it'd be important to lay a little bit of groundwork about miracles, like what miracles are, like what is the definition of miracles that we can all agree on before we get started, so that we can avoid confusion. Because I think miracles, the term miracle has kind of been distorted. We kind of use the word miracle, sort of superfluously or hyperbolically, like it'd be a miracle if I ever get married someday. Like the word just kind of seems to have lost its meaning. So, for the purposes of our discussion, let's flesh out a good definition of miracle. Like, what would you say is the definition of a miracle?
I think what I would say is an event outside of natural processes.
Well, what defines natural then?
I would say that the normal action of physical processes.
Yeah. I think key there is normal. Because normal is something that you can observe repeatedly, and so if this is if this is the way we would expect something to behave on a repeatable, observable basis, then a miracle would be a deviation from that. For example, when you die, you stay dead. So a resurrection would be a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
This essay didn't really go the direction I thought it would.
Mm-hmm.
It was good, but in the beginning he talks about, let me see if I can get back to it. I took my bookmark out.
147.
Thank you. He talks about 17th century Scotsman David Hume. Does that name ring a bell?
Mm-hmm.
So in apologetics, the problem of miracles has actually been under attack for a long time. David Hume is probably one of the biggest names in criticisms of miracles. Interestingly, David Hume doesn't attack the possibility of miracles, he attacks the knowability of miracles. So he doesn't say, oh, miracles are just impossible, they never happen. He doesn't say that. He says, if a miracle happens, it would be irresponsible for you to believe that it was a miracle. It would be more responsible to assume that surely there must be some other explanation besides being a miracle. And interestingly, one of the criteria that he requires for recognizing miracles is that there must be some analogous case. And so what's funny, I really like the analogy that is presented here. It's actually not original to Craig Blomberg. It's from Thomas Sherlock, where he says, if every event must have a known analogy, then people in the tropics before modern technology could never accept that ice exists. Because they've never seen ice. It's too hot in the tropics, So that's such a good illustration of that intellectual sufficiency for accepting the truth of something. Like if you have never seen it before, then surely it must not exist. Like, well, yeah. Just look at the case of the people who live in the tropics. They've never seen ice, so if you told them about frozen water in the form of ice, they'd be like, we've never seen that. Doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's interesting. So last week, that same thought process can be applied. The four things in that one short video, premises of evolution, they've never seen them observed. So they can say, well, they don't exist, but they do believe they exist. So it's like, they have their cake, you need it too.
It's interesting reading that with the David Hume argument. I agree to a certain extent with that argument.
With Hume.
With Hume, yeah. There's all kinds of claims of miracles out there from other sources and stuff, and my instinct is to, let's look at what
other
possibilities of a physical reality that actually occurred and not a miracle. Not saying they don't exist, but I think they're rare, I would say. So I think that the argument is, can be taken to extreme, but I think that there's some legitimacy to the argument.
Right. Yeah, I wish we had time to dive more deeply into Hume's argument against miracles. He actually has a twofold argument. First is in principle, and then second is in fact. And there's a chapter in Reasonable Faith that directly addresses the problem of miracles, both in response to David Hume as well as in response to Benedict de Spinoza. Spinoza argued that miracles are impossible, and Hume argued not that they're impossible, but that they're just unknowable. And there's responses to both in here. And in fact, the example from Thomas Sherlock, which was in Evidence for God, is presented also, where he says, on that principle, many natural matters of fact would have to be pronounced false. If we admit testimony only when it accords with our prior conceptions, then a man living in a hot climate, for example, would never believe the testimony of others that water could exist in a solid state as ice. So you can see where Craig Blomberg got the ice thing from Thomas Sherlock. And there's actually quite a few people. Thomas Sherlock, Gottfried Less, and William Paley all addressed David Hume's argument against miracles. Surprisingly, in this essay, though, David Hume is only just kind of mentioned in passing, and it seems like most of the attacks on miracles from a contemporary perspective, I think, are the result of misinformation on the internet. people just believe whatever they read on the internet, and so therefore the biggest threat to miracles or the credibility of miracles today is just simply the internet, which I think kind of exposes how high people have set their expectations for belief in God and how low they've set their expectations for disbelief in God. You know, you read something on the internet and just like, oh, Jesus is a copycat of Mithra. Okay, I just believe it. What?
I had to look up Mithraism. I've
Yeah.
never heard of it before.
Yeah. So people look at these ancient myths like Mithra and see some of the features of Mithra and are like, oh, Jesus is a copycat of Mithra. And Mithra isn't the only one. There's a whole bunch of them. In fact, I sent Randy a playlist on YouTube from one of my favorite apologetics channels, Inspiring Philosophy, and he has a whole series of videos comparing these supposed comparisons of Jesus with other ancient, miracles, and people just seem to accept these claims that Jesus is a copycat, just face value.
Well, I think the reason for that is people don't want the responsibility of following God.
Right.
They don't want the consequences of that fundamental understanding.
Well, aren't most of these after Jesus, after the writings of the apostles?
And that's what he
things?
says in the essay, right?
Yeah, that's what he said in the essay, which made me think because when I looked it up and I saw that it was 2nd and 3rd century, and then it was either said there, or was it said in the book, in the essay, that okay, one of those places I got that it was afterwards. So they're really copying Jesus.
Exactly. Did you want to take a look at the Mithra video?
I was just getting ready. I have another video as well.
Sure.
But
Either one.
I haven't used these, how that.
This one's for the TV and this one's for the DVD player. Let's see.
So there's other, I don't know if he didn't touch on it, is, yeah.
Let's try this one.
What was it you were saying, Randy?
So people who don't believe in God, yeah, must be dead. So like in college and academia, there's that, I don't know if you remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about materialistic naturalism, that every explanation has to have a material explanation in nature. If it's outside of nature, well, that's not, you can't even think about that. And a lot of miracles is viewed as the same way. Well, if it's supernatural, it's outside of the realm of what can naturally happen. So if you exclude that and you don't believe in God and you can't accept supernatural things, then you by default dismiss miracles wholesale. Now, if you do believe there's a God, then you can believe in miracles. I have a short video on that. Because if there is God, and he did create things, then surely he can do miracles. It follows logic. But there's that thought that, well, there's no God, and it has to be explained materialistic. It has to be explained naturally. Okay?
Well, there are times when I'm laying on my couch thinking about Christianity and faith and where I am with it, and reassuring myself that I've
no
got.
signal for just a moment there.
Oh,
There it is.
I go back to my definition of God, and it's real basic. Did he create the universe? Because if he created the universe, which I believe, and created human beings, because I look at the complexity of cells and things like that, I mean, I look at it from that point of view, that just reassures me that there is a God. Okay, then I can go into Jesus and stuff like that, but I always have to go back to my basic definition. Do I believe there is a God? And just creation itself and everything about us, which is why I'm always interested in the biology ones. I do believe there is and was a God, and then Jesus comes from that.
That's the cornerstone of our belief. If there's no God, well, then just...
Yeah, it'd be interesting to study the ontological argument. But now that you mentioned the definition of God, That's,
I don't
that's
know if
what-
it is, it's just my personal that I have to review.
Well, that's
sometimes.
essentially what the ontological argument is. The ontological argument is a definition of God, and according to the definition of God, God is the greatest being conceivable, and if God is the greatest being conceivable, then he must exist in all possible worlds, and considering that our world is one of many possible worlds, if God is the greatest conceivable being, then God must exist. So in short, the ontological argument is that if it's even possible that God exists, then God must exist, by definition.
How do I spell ontological?
O-N-T-O, and then logical.
Logical argument, okay.
Something that just struck me there, you were talking about the, naturalistic view. And the naturalistic view is actually contrary to science. Because if you think about it, it's, you have a box where you put everything in and you're excluding everything outside of that box, okay? But you don't know what's outside of that box. So the scientific method is trying to discover the nature of reality, okay? So if you are constrained in this little box, you're not exercising true science because you're excluding anything outside of your knowledge and your understanding.
That sounds incredibly relevant to Corey's sermon this morning, because science tries to, like you said, confine everything to the box of our universe. Why? Because that's the only thing that we as observers, as those who can do science, have control over, even as limited control as we have. I think that's why. And so, in a sense, it's a little bit noble, I think, because science is attempting to have the intellectual humility to say, well, whatever is outside, our box of our universe, we have no way of knowing what it is according to what we practice as science, and so therefore we'll just exclude it from the scope of what we can observe. So I think in a sense, perhaps originally the intent was intellectual humility, although I think it's turned into, well, we don't know what it is, therefore it must not exist, and we're just going to completely ignore it altogether.
Went from humility to pride.
Right. Yeah, because we can't control it, so it's just like, well, it must not exist.
Yeah.
Now, do we believe dark matter exists? I started reading a recent study, it came out yesterday on the internet, that they're saying that dark matter does not exist, and I don't know enough about, it's a new it just came out yesterday, and I don't know if it's credible or what, but they're now saying that dark matter does not, or the study is saying dark matter does not exist. What is in terms of intelligent design? Just because I know we're off the topic, but what in terms of intelligent design do they say about dark matter? I don't know.
It's probably a semantical argument, right?
Is it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
If someone is claiming that dark matter doesn't exist, it's probably because they want to call it something else, because we have to account for this mass, right? There's
That's
a
a
certain
good
amount of
point.
mass, and we're thinking it's dark matter, and someone else is like, no, we're gonna call it me matter,
Okay, all right, well, I started reading it and I just kind of got lost on it.
I kind of have a different view in that and I read something here just recently that they think that maybe their estimates of dark matter were off by, 20% or something like that, and my whole concept or my understanding, and I haven't pursued it extensively, is that if you have to make up something that comprises 70-80% of the mass of the universe in order to fit your model, then your model is probably wrong.
Well, and that
Necessarily.
sounds like a restatement of the God of the gaps, because that's what skeptics would say of us.
Yeah.
Christians, like, well, if you
Yeah.
don't have an explanation of it, you just say, well, it's God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've discovered plenty of things by applying, there's a reason we've stuck to our model, and there's a reason why we're trying to marry up our current model with the quantum models to make more sense of things.
Sure.
To me, it's still all just a matter of trying to understand what God gave us, right? Like, some people get on the defensive, and I don't like when people get into those camps and start arguing against science because they're so deeply religious. And I'm like, well, I mean, we came up with penicillin, we came up with so many wonderful things that God gave us. They're here on this earth for us to use. And, you know, without being closed-minded, we were able to exploit them. Is it dark matter? Who knows? We're in very early stages of this thing.
Yeah.
We might find out, maybe there is dark matter, but maybe it only accounts for 30% of what we're missing. Or we'll find out our model is wrong, which doesn't seem likely. Who knows?
Yeah.
But without having read the article, I'm assuming it's semantics like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective to take. Like, how much of this is honestly, you know, a matter of true false versus how much of this is just talking past each other because we're using different words for the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, your video?
So, I mean, I don't know how long this is. Hopefully it's not too long. I
So,
don't want to take up too much time.
yeah, so mine, I think it was 5. This one. Yeah, that one's 6. And then yours is 4. So 10 minutes on here.
Okay. And yeah, we don't have to watch it. It just, I thought it was relevant because that whole playlist basically addresses the you know, the angle of this article, which is people reading these claims, probably mostly on the internet, that Jesus just copied whatever else, and they don't really look into it very far. They don't drill into it to see, actually, Mithra wasn't really born on December 25th. Not that even matters, but whatever.
Yeah, so we'll do Mithra first.
Okay.
So, and you'll see in the beginning of it, they have a couple pictures of the people who created. It's called Zeitgeist. It was like a movie documentary on these, and I wouldn't recommend watching it unless you know your history and stuff. Like, watch this first, but then you don't really need to watch the other one anyway. But it was a popular video. I think it came out in the 90s or something, of just all this stuff.
I think it was shortly after 9/11. Because I
Yeah.
think didn't Zeitgeist come after Pocket Change?
I've never heard of either one.
Yeah,
But
it's-
anyway, this is one video in a series on Inspiring Philosophy's YouTube channel that directly addresses supposed, copycats of that Jesus is supposedly a copycat of something else, and kind of breaks it down. So this is just one, Mithra, which we just picked because Mithra was mentioned in the essay.
Mm-hmm.
Mithra. Christ Mithras will claim Jesus never existed and was just a copy of Mithra, because Mithra was born of a virgin on December 25th. He was a traveling teacher and performed miracles. He had 12 disciples. He sacrificed himself for world peace, was buried in a tomb, and resurrected 3 days later on Easter morning. His followers were promised immortality. He was called the Good Shepherd, Savior, Redeemer, the Way, the Truth, and the Light. His holy day was Sunday, and his followers partook in the Lord's Supper every week. So do we have proof that Jesus was a mythic copy of the god Mithra? Well, for that to even be remotely true, some of this nonsense would have to be factually correct, and in fact it is not. First, there are actually 3 different versions of Mithra, and none of them match Christianity. Most who try to claim this tend to think the Mithra of the Roman cult is where Jesus came from. But this mystical religion surrounding Mithra didn't leave any writings behind for us to know what they believe. So we have to piece most of it together from secondhand sources and inscriptions. First, it is unlikely Mithra was born of a virgin. All sources indicate the Roman version was born out of a rock. This is also confirmed by Commodianus. In other versions, Mithra was created as an adult by Ahura Mazda. And even in Persian versions of Mithra, there is no indication from inscriptions he was born of a virgin. As for December 25th, Roger Beck states this is just absolutely wrong. In truth, the only evidence for it is the celebration of the birthday of Invictus on that Dadan calendar of Philo-Calus. Invictus is of course Sol Invictus, Aurelian's sun god. It does not follow that a different, earlier and unofficial sun god, Sol Invictus Mithras, was necessarily, or even probably, born on that day too. There is no evidence Mithra was ever called a traveling teacher. As for performing miracles, such a task was said of just about every deity, and is way too general to form any parallel. There is no evidence Mithra had 12 disciples in any version. In the Persian or Iranian version, he had one companion, who was Varuna, and in the Roman version, he only had 2 companions. The idea that Mithra had 12 disciples is taken from this image of Mithra, slaying of the bull, where he is surrounded by 12 figures. But these are not disciples. They are the signs of the zodiac. Plus, this inscription postdates Christianity, so it cannot mean any type of dependency. There is no evidence Mithra sacrificed himself for world peace, and Christ Mithras
If he
have
did,
yet
it
to
doesn't
provide
work.
any evidence. The closest one can get is the story of Mithra slaying the bull, but that doesn't compare to Christianity at all. As for his burial and resurrection, this is just an outright modern lie. There is no indication in any version of Mithra that he died, let alone was buried and resurrected. The closest one can get is a piece of graffiti dated to after 200 AD, which reads, "And us too you saved by spilling the eternal blood." However, every Mithric scholar notes this refers to the spilling of the bull's blood, not his own. The Mithric cult probably did promise their followers immortality, because that was customary in almost all religions, and is way too general to force any type of real parallel. But even if this is true, we still aren't really sure, because again, we simply don't have any Mithric writings left for us. Roger Beck even suspects that in the Mithric religion, there was never any specific ritual about the soul's journey after death. Mithric was never called the Good Shepherd, Savior, Redeemer, the Way, the Truth, and the Light, or any common title that is applied to Christ. These are just outright lies. Now, it is true that Mithra's holy day was on Sunday, but given there are only 7 days in a week, and the first day of the week was significant for many cultures, it is hardly evidence of borrowing. Plus, we should also note, most of our knowledge on the Mithric cult comes from after the time of Jesus. So if there was borrowing, it is more probable it was the other way around, meaning the Mithric cult stole from Christians. Michelle Zalzman even notes that the Mithric cult use of Sunday postdates the New Testament. Finally, there is no evidence of a Lord's Supper in the Mithric cult. Any reference to this comes from very late medieval texts that cannot be trusted. So since that is the case, there is no evidence Jesus was just a myth based on Mithra.
It's funny. It's exactly what you said, Debbie. It seems more likely that these later things actually copied Christianity.
Mm-hmm. I'm just writing down that site so I'll remember it. I do eventually get to some of these.
Yeah, and I'll have a link in the video, and I can include that link in the
Okay.
in email if it helps.
So actually, I'll play a different video. It kind of gives another criteria for believing in miracles and the historicity of what people have said in archaeology and whatnot.
Right, Frank, I'm wondering, when you look into the Bible and you read about all the miracles that Jesus performed, or apparently performed, depending on your point of view, I wonder, and you may refute that, but why is there no evidence left behind of his miracles?
Well, what evidence would you expect there to be left behind, like a living Lazarus or something? I mean, what do you mean?
But there is no evidence.
That would be convincing. Well, the evidence that you can get that something occurred in the past is you get it via eyewitness testimony. You can also get it through archaeology. You can get evidence that way to figure out what happened in the past. My colleague Ted Wright here always asks people what ship went down in 1912. And if you're in Denmark, you know the Titanic, because we just asked the question of a bunch of Danish students the other day in school. They said the Titanic, and the next question was, well, how do you know that? Were you there? No. Is anybody still alive right now from the Titanic? No. So how do you know? Well, you've got eyewitness testimony, and you also have archaeological remains. You have the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. That's how you get a history. But let me point out one thing about Jesus' miracles. People think Jesus' miracles were like magic tricks. They were not. Jesus did 3 kinds of miracles. He had miracles over life, so he could resurrect the dead. He had miracles over sickness, and he also had miracles over nature, so like he could calm the storm. And the reason he did miracles in those three areas is because those are our major three problems. That we have sickness, death, and natural disasters. And when the Messiah comes, he's going to solve those problems. And his ultimate miracle was giving himself for our sin. That's our biggest problem.
Oh man, it's such a cliffhanger. Like, I wish there was more to it. I'm sure there is.
Oh yeah, that one. It's how do we know? I mean, there's people now that claim miracles of other faith systems and all kinds of stuff. So we just disbelieve all of them? I mean, you know anyone who has been healed?
Yeah.
So we just not believe them because, I mean, how is it accurate? Right? Well, no. So I like his analogy there. Were you there? No. Do you know? So how can you know? Right, well, witnesses. So what do we have in the Bible? Now it's convenient in our Bible, all 66 books is one nice, convenient bundle. But at the time, right, those are all separate, different writings. And the different writings confirmed each other. But those aside, even so you can use those. That's evidence there for miracles. And then you can look at other evidences. You look in the Talmud and the Jewish writings, and they talk about Jesus and what he did and different miracles. They said he was just a sorcerer, but they said he did them still.
Oh, does it really?
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Overall, I didn't find this chapter particularly compelling. There were bits and pieces. I thought he talked about a little bit about writings of like Josephus and others that testified about Jesus' miracles, which I found compelling. But overall, it was vague. I think he kind of missed some opportunity in this. But I think the fact that, like you say, that the scribes and Pharisees did not disavow his miracles, they had disavowed the source of his miracles, which I find very compelling because it's almost an admission against interest. So yeah, I mean that to me is one of the most profound parts of that.
Yeah, often I wish these were deeper, but I think they're purposely not super deep because otherwise the book would be.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, have you seen Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology? It's basically the same format, just much deeper. And there's fewer articles. There's only like maybe 10 or 15 articles.
Yeah, there was, and I'm not going to get too far. I'm just going to list them just so you could know they're there. These are criteria people use. Historians use for proof of Jesus' miracles. So you have the criterion of multiple attestations, so multiple sources.
Can you zoom in on that?
Yeah.
There we go.
The criterion of embarrassment.
This is historical. Yeah, this is historical criteria. So really, it seems like we're not really examining the problem of miracles. We're examining the problem of historical knowledge.
Which they're one and the same.
Well, sort of. David Hume and Spinoza don't really question history as much as they question like the reality of miracles. Multiple attestation, embarrassment, coherence, unique style choice.
What is the criterion of embarrassment?
That is a very good question.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here. They do mention it.
Embarrassment.
It's like something
Something that is included despite the fact that it embarrasses you. Sorry, go ahead.
I would say
that's
that
perfect.
I would say that is what I was speaking of
Mhm.
the Pharisees not disputing the miracle, but disputing its source, because that's an embarrassment to them that Jesus did these things, and so they had to come up with an explanation for it.
A good example of the criteria of embarrassment would be, who were the first witnesses of the empty tomb?
The women,
Why would that be embarrassing?
women's testimony was not accepted.
Right. So if it was all made up, they wouldn't have placed women as the first witnesses, because that would have been discreditable. They would have been like, oh, women's testimonies are worthless. If they made it up, they'd have been like, oh yeah, well, all 12 of us were there, and you know, like they would have tried to make it sound more credible. I'm trying to find the description here of the criterion of embarrassment, but that's essentially what it is including something despite the fact that it's embarrassing.
I'll be asking on each one of these, I'm writing these down and I don't understand any of them.
That's all right. That's why we're here.
He's looking that up. I'll go over the other ones. So there's coherence with the environment of Palestine at the time of Jesus. Are these writings, that these miracles that are written about, are they coherent with how life was then at that time in context with the culture and everything that they believed? The coherence with the unique style of Jesus. So it's the life of Jesus coherent across all these different sources.
What does that mean, the life of Jesus, the unique style of Jesus?
So if you were to read in one book per se that this is the way Jesus is, the way he acts and talks and speaks, and then you go to another source and he's completely different, like a completely different person almost. Those would contradict each other. So
I'm a little unclear on that next one now.
yeah.
Which one? Semitisms?
Semitisms.
That has to do with like coherence with existing Jewish theology and worldview. So if it contradicted something that they already agreed on, then it's less likely that it was just made up. Let me see if I can find it. There's a page in here that's like it describes all 5 of those criteria.
Let's put it down when you're done.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
And we did talk about that, those criteria, I think second to last week of On Guard. I know I do this every week, but I'll put a link up there. Here we go, Semitic traces. So here are the criteria. There's multiple attestation, dissimilarity, embarrassment, Semitic traces, context and expectation, effect, and principles of embellishment, coherence, historical congruence. Semitic traces, an example of Semitic traces would be like Aramaisms play a part in showing that the tradition quoted by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 stems from the early church in Jerusalem. We also saw Semitic traces in the account of the empty tomb preserved in the pre-Mark Passion story. Must be earlier in the chapter.
well, I was looking up. So then the last one, specific identifiable names and places in regard to Jesus. That just gives credibility to that. There's just made up names and made up places and no one can find them.
Right.
It doesn't really help the case, kind of like the Book of Mormon.
Right, that would be multiple attestation, right? Yeah, there's
They're
only
saying
one
there's-
source of the Book of Mormon.
I was gonna say, there's a lot of times they say they can't find those places, but archaeology is finding
Mhm.
Yes.
those, more and more
Yeah.
where they are.
I think one thing that is interesting with that is the claim by archaeologists for a long time that the reign of David never happened.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then, like, within the last 20 years,
Yeah.
they found evidence of King David. It's like, here it is.
Numerous
Really?
different times, yeah.
So they denied Solomon and all of them?
And denied a whole lot of what's in the Bible. A whole lot.
Really?
Oh yeah. So it's fascinating. You see these come out, and then they're like, oh, wow, okay, I guess it was true.
It kind of reminds me, last week, they talked about, at the end of his deal, he said the stages of denial, reluctant acceptance, then.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
last
the
week's
other one,
essay.
the last one
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
of course, we knew that all along.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Right.
So other questions anybody have in that section?
One thing that I just want to say is, I have experienced what I believe as miracles in my own life and time. But even beyond that, I've experienced many cases of coincidences that were just impossible to explain. Not necessarily miracles in the sense that they violated physical possibilities, but miracles in the sense that, yeah, there's too many elements of this that had to be orchestrated ahead of time for it to be just completely coincidence.
Well, here's a miracle. At Crossfire, we pray about things a lot. And there was this baby in utero where there was a mass of some sort in the heart. It was not going to be conducive to life. They took pictures, they had measurements of it, they knew it was there. And when the baby was born, it wasn't there. This is real recent, like about 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that's a miracle.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think my sister would mind me sharing. She had cervical cancer, and it was like stage 2 or 3, and she was young, real young, and they had all the images and all the stuff, and so her and my mom are going, and okay, well, this is what you're gonna have to do. This is what's gonna happen, and then she was reading God's promises, the Bible, and praying, and went to the church and got prayed over. She went back, all gone, and they're like, oh well, it must have been a bad scan or a bad thing. I don't know. It's like, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, one of the things that was kind of interesting, rather humorous. God seems to use humor with me quite a bit, but anyway, I was praying about leaving the church we were at. There was some conflict and different stuff, and it was just my wife and I were just struggling with it. God, just show us what to do. We want to have an impact where we are, but are we the people to make that change? And just all of the questions and the friendships and just all that drama around that sort of thing. And so one evening I'm praying, and I had on this musical sampler and classical music, and I turned up pretty loud, but most of the passages were pretty quiet, And I'm praying, and finally it just hits me, it clicks, okay, this is what you want me to do. we need to move on and take the next step. And at that very moment, the Hallelujah chorus comes on, just blast. Okay, I get it. You know, I mean, that wasn't a miracle. That wasn't something divinely. It wasn't like, you know, Hallelujah chorus wasn't on the CD or anything like that, you know. But the timing, just everything surrounded it. It's just like, yeah, somebody was working on this, you know. They had this planned, you know, foreknowledge and all that, you know.
Those are cool.
And I've had many different things like that, you know, that just confirm that God is there, God is real, and I have absolutely no doubt about the true miracles talked about in the Bible, because they've been confirmed by the little miracles as such in my life.
Yeah. And if you look at the prophecies in the Old Testament about the coming Messiah, I mean, those in themselves, I would call those miracles too.
Yeah.
I mean, the probability of those happening, mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorites with that regard is, it says in different places the Messiah will come out of Egypt, Nazareth, and Bethlehem. Okay, which is it? Well, all three. It's just, okay, yeah. How'd that work out? You know.
Yeah, that's cool.
They mention apocryphal Christian miracles by them not talking about Jesus when he was young. And I think, if I understood this right, they were talking about how his real mission is when he's later, that there was no reason to talk about his childhood. Is that what they were talking about, or?
Well, we don't know about his childhood.
No, we don't.
So they're some of these apocryphal writings, they're trying to, what it says, fill the gaps.
Okay.
Whether or not they're true or not, I will probably say we can't know for sure. I'm leaning towards no. But I mean, we do have a little bit. You know, he was a young child, and his parents left, and he was still in the synagogue studying.
Mm-hmm. Talking to the rabbis. Mm-hmm.
But we don't have a whole lot.
That intrigues me from his first recorded miracle, where his mother said, "Do whatever he says." You know, did she know something? Had she seen miracles that he had performed? Or was he just, you know, extremely competent and, you know, took control of situations, you know, great leadership kind of thing? Or had she seen hints of what he could do beforehand?
Wasn't she told who he is when Jesus was conceived?
Yeah, that's a whole nother interesting, like, if she knows, does she not just tell everybody? Or she kept quiet? So then when Christ is talking about he's not going to go back to his hometown because the people won't believe. Okay, well then, it kind of sounds like then he wasn't performing miracles in his early life.
Right.
He was just the carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's interesting.
Given the political climate, I'd assume that she would not be telling everyone.
Well, his brothers and his sisters didn't believe. So if they would have witnessed him doing unusual things.
I did finally find expanded descriptions of these criteria. Hopefully we're not too far progressed beyond that. But the 6 criteria are historical congruence, independent early attestation, embarrassment, dissimilarity, Semitisms, and coherence. The description for embarrassment is that the saying or the occurrence is awkward or counterproductive for the person who serve as the source of information for the saying or the event. So including it actually serves to support its truth, because including it is embarrassing for them. So like if it were false, it wouldn't be so embarrassing. They would have portrayed it in a way that wasn't embarrassing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then as for Semitisms, his expanded description is that there are traces in the narrative of Aramaic or Hebraic linguistic forms. I think that means like, you know, when you're considering the source of someone, if it doesn't sound like the way they would write, it's like, what did, you know, did Scott really write this? It doesn't sound like Scott, you know, or versus something else was like, that's, I know Scott, that sounds like Scott. You know, I think that's what Semitisms means, is like, you know, it sounds like it came from, you know, that source.
Yeah, that's good.
Boy, I did not expect this conversation to go down the problem of historical knowledge versus the credibility of miracles. But
Like I said before, I think that they're the same in many
they
ways.
definitely blur quite a bit together. There's a reason why the problem of historical knowledge and the problem of miracles are like right next to each other in reasonable things. But I think the moral of the story, at least in my mind, is how easily people will just go along with something that they find on the internet. Like, oh, Jesus is a copycat of Horus, or oh, Jesus is a copycat of Mithra, or oh, Jesus is a copycat of whoever, and they just go along with it, you know, because their criteria for disbelief is inversely proportionate to their criteria for belief. Maybe that's just a product of, you know.
Well, I think there's a line from Braveheart that says, "One lie, all lies." And so I think that's, in some ways, a wise way of looking at things, in that, you know, if you destroy the credibility of something in one particular spot, then you have very little reason to trust them in any other, which I think is a valid point. But I believe that Jesus' miracles stand up on their own and cannot be assailed, you know, legitimately. So, but I think the concept is legitimate in discounting.
It's an interesting one, because like if I were to say something that's not in my area of expertise and I said it wrong or explained it wrong, well, does it mean the area that I am in expertise that I said that wrong? So, but when we claim the Bible's inerrant, well, then that's a whole different issue. You know?
You know, with the criterion for embarrassment, who has a whole lot to lose if Jesus is the Messiah? The Jews. They killed him. Do they claim that he did rise from the dead? They do, but he's still not the Messiah.
Right.
You know, but they believe it. They were there. Like, yeah, he came back. We killed him. He came back. So
They admit the tomb was empty.
yeah.
I have a moment of advice along with that is when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and the Pharisees were like, well, we'll just have to kill him too. Wait a minute, let's step back here for a moment. That's pretty significant here.
Oh, so much is stolen about Christ's body. So you're admitting it's empty.
So shall we consider a topic for this week? Sorry, before we get to that, are there any final comments or questions or thoughts? I didn't want to just like, all right, moving right along.
Is the one right before it, did Jesus really exist, too close to what we just did today?
It says you did already.
Yeah, we had already done that one.
Oh, have we
but
already done that one?
We could redo it. I mean, that's not.
Oh, I didn't mean to say that we have to redo. Oh, yes, we did that October 1st. That's right. Let's pick some. can we be certain that Jesus died on a cross? A look at the ancient practice of crucifixion. That would be kind of gross. Crucifixion.
Yeah, I think Gary Habermas was the one who was like, you know, if your kid is ever doing a study of crucifixion, don't use Jesus as the model for crucifixion, because nothing about Jesus' crucifixion was like normal.
Okay.
But that's, I don't know if that's part of the essay. We could do that one, certainly. I don't have any objection to that.
Looks like a fun topic. That was sarcasm, by the way. Just in case anybody was wondering about me.
Okay. A look at the practice of crucifixion.
It's 33, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on page 164. Sounds good. So, we'll put that on deck for next week. Would anybody like to close this with prayer? No, I can. Father, you are King, you're sovereign over everything, and we worship you. We thank you for who you are. Lord, I just thank you for demonstrating your mighty power through your miracles throughout history and even today, Lord. Father, I just pray that you'd open the eyes of our hearts to see you in everything, in every detail of every day. Lord, I just pray this week as we study the history of crucifixion, that we would be mindful of your sacrifice, especially as we approach Easter, Lord. I just pray that you would be with us, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
You know, that does make sense, because the one right after that is, did he rise from the resurrection? That would be a perfect one for Easter, or the empty tomb, either one of those.
Yeah.
And build on each other and all. Yeah. You were thinking ahead. Good job.